Hi, I'm Paul,
And I'm Bucky.
and we're here for Paul and Bucky Skills for Life. And today we thought we'd do something a little bit different. We wanted to talk about social justice and inclusion. Um, and rather than us sort of doing this prepared list of topics we wanted to talk about, we wanted to just kind of have an open discussion. And while we do this, we recognize that we are two white males having a discussion about um, race and inclusion, and I think we'll get to a little bit. We just want you to understand some of the perspectives. Certainly, there's a lot more to Bucky and I than just being two white males. We have lots of identities, and we'll talk more about that, I think. But just wanted to recognize that as we are moving forward and bringing our perspective on this important topic. So we're going to ask just a couple of questions of each other and just kind of go back and forth talking about what our thoughts are. So Bucky, why don't you take us out?
All right. Well, thanks, Paul, for the intro. And so the first question is, why should white people care about racism? And I think for me, I just feel like what's happened in this country due to racism has been a terrible thing. And I think that we have not begun to even bridge that gap between races to really be the best that we can be as a not only as a country but as individuals ourselves. So and I think one of the things that each of us individually has to do is sort of try to unlearn the assumptions that we have about people of other races. I think a lot of us, myself included, I think we may find certain characteristics that we're like, and we sort of generalize those characteristics. So I'll just give an example. So maybe this isn't my assumption, but I know it's a widely accepted or a wildly assumed assumption is that in order to be, all young black men should play basketball because they're really good at basketball. No, not all young black men are good at basketball. So that's just an example of an assumption that we may have, and that it's really it's just that it's an assumption, and we make that and we take those assumptions and we generalize it like that, and unfortunately, it gets in the way of us really coming together as human beings and people. So. So I think that that's part of it. I think also too realizing that as a white male in this society, I have privilege that black males do not have. I can be pulled over by the police, or I can walk into a store and not feel like, okay, I got to be really, really careful here. And so I have no idea what it's like to always be on that hypersensitive side, to be like, okay, I have to be prepared for this, and the anxiety that comes with that. So I think that I think that's another layer of that. It's really hurts me to know that a black person can't be pulled over by the police and not worry about it, or not feel like they're a target, or walk into a store and not feel like, oh boy, I better be careful in here because I don't want to get myself in trouble. So those are just two things that I've been thinking of. I was also just thinking about culture and how we sort of, as white people, maybe feel more comfortable with Black people who sort of live the white culture instead of really trying to understand the Black culture. And so I think that there's a lot of discussions that need to happen, and a lot of talking about trying to understand other perspectives and trying to understand other cultures because they are different. And so, trying to bring people together to have those discussions and using your active listening skills when you're having those discussions. And I think, I know we've talked in the past about perspective taking and trying to understand other people's perspective instead of, making assumptions or getting defensive or whatever that may be. So, and it's a lot. I don't think that's. I think that's an effort that we as myself as a white male need to do. I need to make that effort. It's not something that's just going to automatically happen. I need to take those steps to make that happen. So
I think one of the, over the years, as I've tried to learn more and more about racism and social inequality, I feel like I learn so much more about myself, especially like in sort of some of the things that have been happening over the last year. It feels like things have become a lot more visible, and there are things that I couldn't imagine. Like, I spent some time living in a town in New Hampshire called Derry, New Hampshire, which probably many people are familiar with because it's one of the towns where the presidential, races get a lot of attention. This was considered a town. It started as an all-white town. Like, the idea was to just have no non-white people there, and a lot of social punishments. Police were involved in sort of regulating who could be in that town and who couldn't. And knowing that even in Vermont, in the state that we live, where in a lot of places in Vermont, there isn't a lot of diversity. And recognizing that there are places that, I've lived and been where Black people for a long time weren't even welcome. And that's something new I didn't know. And it was really, it's hard to, some of the outrage I think that white people are feeling now as they're starting to recognize that folks who don't have white privilege are starting to are saying, hey, welcome to the party. we've been experiencing this for years, and we've known how unjust this is, and we've been feeling the way that some of us may be feeling now, that we're really recognizing some of the injustice that that's something they've been living with for a very long time, and we're just starting maybe to feel a little bit from an outsider's perspective. And one of the privileges that I think in so many, like with racism and people who struggle with having disabilities, which in a lot of ways I think a disability is kind of a different way of doing things that society doesn't necessarily have as a norm. So they have to learn to live with a culture and a norm that doesn't always fit for them. And some of the privileges that we have that we don't even realize, that when our culture is the norm, and what it's like for people that don't have that, don't fit that norm.
Right.
I mean, a simple example of that is left-handed people at the very root. I mean, people who are left-handed, they have everything in this culture is for right-handed people. And buying left-handed equipment is more expensive. So life is actually more expensive for left-handed people in our society. But as a right-handed person, I often don't have to worry about or think about, if I go out and buy a glove, is it, going to fit me, or do I have to order something special? Are they going to have the equipment that I need? And that's just a small example of how our society really tends to uphold just one standard and kind of leaves other people
Right.
out of that society.
Yep. Yep. That's that norm that, sort of the white culture norm that, that exists. And, we're always trying to, it seems like we're always trying to get people to fit into that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, first of all, it's just one way, and there's more than one way. And so we need to be open-minded and say, hey, even though I've been doing it this way for so long, it's not necessarily the right way, or there are other ways. There are other viewpoints, there are other perspectives. And so being able to open our minds and to encourage and welcome those other perspectives. Um, and that's the way we can sort of get out of that white culture norm, and start taking a look, like you said, like you didn't even realize, when you were growing up in Derry, New Hampshire. It makes me think of my sister lives outside of Birmingham, Alabama, and so I went down there, my first time really down in the deep South. And there's a incredible civil rights museum down there. Incredible to the point where it is very moving. It's upsetting. And so we went through and we saw the Civil Rights Museum, and we finished and we came out, and this African American male comes up to us on a bicycle. He was riding his bike, and he comes up to us and he's like, "What did you think?" And we were just like, "That was just incredible." And then he goes, "Well, let me tell you a little bit more. The church across the street from where the museum is was the church. There was a church bombing, and there were 4 young Black girls that were killed in that church bombing. And so there's a park across. There's also a park on the other adjacent to the museum that has fountains, 4 fountains, and each fountain represents the tears of the girls going into this pool. You go through the park, and they actually have like the attack dogs that you go through, and they're sculptures, they're metal sculptures of attack dogs, and you walk through. So you just really get a sense of what it must have been like. And so it gives you a chance to understand a different perspective. So it was really moving. And the fact that Birmingham, Alabama was actually the answer to the Civil War to the South, that was a segregated city, set up that way. It was set up so that Blacks worked in the mining, or iron mining is huge down there. So they worked in the factories and did the grunt work. And if you go to Birmingham today, and you walk in the city is mostly Black. And as soon as you step outside of the city, it's very white. So still segregated in that way. So I mean, I just think that, those types of experiences are really important to have.
I think too, one of the things we lose by not understanding and engaging in racism is it's hurtful to me to live in a society where the opportunity is different for everyone. I mean, if it can happen to one person, it can happen to any person. And I don't want to live in a world where people aren't respected or given the equal opportunity. I think when we work together to build a better society, that's when we can really come together and create something amazing. But I think we've had so many different identities that separate us, and sometimes by design, unfortunately. And I think that, getting rid of those barriers, and one of the real privileges that we have is that we get to put this fight down. Like if we choose to engage in this fight and say, I'm a white person that wants to stand up against racism. In some ways, I am making myself, a target by doing that, and I'm entering the fight. But then I also get to put the fight down when I want to. I can go into any city and if I don't feel safe, I don't challenge something that I hear that's not okay, and I can choose to go to a family dinner. And when someone says something that I disagree with or I feel like is racist, I don't have to challenge it. Whereas I think people who are visibly different than the normal culture, when I say different, I mean than the norm, and that's also a privilege, being able to have your culture be the dominant culture. I think they don't have that privilege of putting down that fight for a moment when they feel afraid or when they feel like they're being challenged. They don't get the ability to say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this today. I'll deal with racism tomorrow. Today, I'm just going to go do my own thing. And it just pervades a lot of what people are going through on a daily basis. And I think part of the privilege we have is we don't have to deal with that all the time. And when we let those things go, I feel like that's another notch of damage that it does to our society and to our spirits, who we are.
Yeah. So you mentioned, one other thing too is just history. I mean, this isn't something that just sort of happened in the 21st century. It's been happening for a long, long time, and I think too that as a white male growing up and being educated in a system that is totally, you're given the white perspective. You're not given the other perspectives. You're not given the perspectives of the Black person. You're not given the perspectives of the Native American. You're not given the perspective of the Pacific Islander. You aren't given any of those perspectives, and so no wonder the system is built to narrow you down into, this is the way it was, this is the way it is. And so, you're missing history. You really are. So, being able to read about Black history or Native American history, I think those are really valuable things and can help with that perspective taking, and instead of just having this sort of narrow white perspective that we've been given. So that's just something else to think about.
And I hate calling it Black history or Native American history because it's history.
Right.
It's sort of the whitewashing of history, in that, white people have been told this is history and they've left so much out. And part of that, I think we have to come to terms with how much at the beginning of this country, how much we took from other people, how much the Native Americans really helped the colonists who came here to survive, and how the colonists, really took advantage of that. And then, how a lot of the wealth was gained off of slave labor from Black people who were brought from Africa in order to, to plant crops and to make a lot of money and to have very cheap labor. And a lot of the wealth that's around today was built on that kind of privilege, that taking away from other people. And those opportunities are still seen in our society, where we can see like healthcare outcomes are worse for non-white people. And that's because they're not getting the same access as we are, as people who are white. And we know, and it's not to say, I think one of the things that comes up is a lot of white people don't believe in racism because they feel like their lives are so hard. And it's true that I think it's hard to separate sometimes classism and racism. Classism is alive and well, and certainly in Vermont, there's a lot of rural, poor white people who are suffering with poor healthcare outcomes, bad housing, and just an inability to be able to afford life. But that is so much worse, even though we're feeling that in lower income white places, it's so much worse for people who are non-white, who have really been at the bottom of what society has to offer. Well, the next question is, what is identity, and why is that important?
Well, that's a good question, Paul. I mean, I think identity comes down to me as a point of belongingness. I think that's what's really important. I think we have an identity, and we belong to, maybe we belong to a church group, or maybe we belong to a group at school, or maybe we belong with our colleagues. I think that identity, no matter who we are, is important to us, because that helps us to define who we are. I think that we get into trouble when we are in our own identity and we don't branch out, or we don't try to gain other perspective. I think sometimes we can become very, very tunnel visioned if we're focused on maybe a singular identity, and don't consider that there are other perspectives, and there are other people are feeling differently than we are. So identity is important, but also realizing that identity, if we don't try to broaden ourselves, can become, can be hurtful to other people, especially when our identities we're so identified with this one thing that anything on the outside is the enemy. And so therefore we're not going to even listen, or we're just focused on who we are, and the heck with them. So
I think those are some really good points. Like you're saying, seeing people as outside or not part of who we are. And I think, one book that I read on identity talks about identity as a false friend. And I think race in itself is, the concept of race is a human-made construct. It really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have, it does now, it has meaning in our society because of what we've put into it. But from a physical standpoint, it has no meaning. And we try to put people in categories, maybe to feel safe, or to help us think we understand something about those people, or about ourselves even. And I think when we attack one identity of a person, it forces them to hold on to that identity more, or to defend that identity. And one thing I believe is that, which I think is scientifically proven, that there is no person on this planet who is the same. No person, I think mathematically, statistically, given that we have so many different experiences, how we interact in life, and our genetic makeup, we are the only version of us that has ever or will ever exist. And so every single person is unique and brings something special, a gift to the world, because they are the only version of that person that will ever be. And so when we lump people into certain categories, then so much is lost in that translation. That to understand a person as a whole, you can never do that by one identity. And we all have so many identities and so many ways to connect with each other. We can connect around things like being fathers, being men,
being pet owners,
being being students, being teachers. Like there's so many ways that we can connect with people on different levels. And when we reduce someone to one aspect of their who they are, then we really are leaving out so much of value of that person that we miss out. We miss out on really getting to know that unique and amazing person that is there. And when you think about how arbitrary something like skin color or a physical attribute is, it's like we think about like if suddenly tomorrow we say all redheads are smarter and they're better, and we're going to treat all redheads differently. And in some ways, those labels are instructions on how we should treat people.
Right.
And I think we need to be really aware of what those mean. I mean, we all have identities that in society, some of those are positive and give us privilege, and some of those are negative.
Right.
And I think we're really reducing a person's value when we hold them to one identity and we don't see the rest.
Yeah. It's trying to unlearn those assumptions that we have in our heads. Because if we can unlearn those, that opens up that whole, what you're talking about, being able to really get to know and understand another person. I think though that underlying the word understanding is really important. I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand each other. And because I think through understanding comes, we recognize value in each other and the importance of what each person has to bring to this world. So, if anything, you aim to go into your interactions with others with that underlying thing, you really want to try to understand what's going on for that person. That in itself will make a big difference.
And I think that's a really good point, Bucky, because I think we have to be open enough to recognize there are things we don't understand and our perspective is limited. So to be open, and for some white people, it's really hard to recognize that someone has a much different experience. We all have this vision of what America is and what it means to be American. And that's steeped in very white identity. Yeah. And for a lot of people, that identity of being American, it feels like it doesn't include them. And it's really hard for people to believe that people can be targeted by the police just because of the color of their skin, or that, they can be asked for 2 IDs when they go to write a check, where a white person is not asked that. And it's hard because, it's outside of our experience sometimes what other people go through. So, and it's hard for us to recognize sometimes the pain of, wow, that's really how it is in our society, that it's not always fair and that people aren't always treated with respect or kindness by other people just because of the way they look. Um, and That's really scary for a lot of people. And it opens our eyes to a wider world that we're not used to seeing. And we don't necessarily know how to, very different sets of rules for different people. And we don't always know how to live within understanding those rules.
Makes me, I know Paul and I talked about this earlier, but I just finished watching um, I guess it's a podcast. It's called Renegades. If you want to check it out on Spotify. But anyways, it's a discussion. It was a discussion between Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen, and Bruce Springsteen said something very sort of poignant for me. It really stuck out that there's also I think this feeling of for white people, for some white people, not all white people, an embarrassment and a shame for what we've what our race has done to Black people, to Native Americans, to Pacific Islanders. So I think that and that shame and embarrassment sometimes can lead to people not wanting to do anything because they're just so they feel so guilty about it. I think that, I mean, it saddens me that we've had to have this history that we've had with the relationship between races, but I'm hopeful, and I think that that's something that, while it is horrible, it's also something that we can move on from and form a better tomorrow. So
I think Bucky, you made a great point that I think it's hard to understand where people are. And I think when I think personally, if I've been targeted on a regular basis for my skin color, and I've been made to feel different every day, and people don't understand or get that I'm living in a much different world they are, I can't imagine how angry I would feel at people for not recognizing. And when I ask for help, when I reach out and say this isn't fair, and people say, well, that's not really true, that can't be true, that can't be that bad, you must have done something, I can't imagine the level of anger I would feel around that. And I think in some ways that's why it's so important for white people to talk to other white people about this, because I think it's very gracious of people who have been suffering with discrimination their whole lives to educate and to stop and try to have understanding to the people who just don't get it and are trying to get it. And this is where I think it is important for white people to try to help as best we can from our own perspective. It's so important to have other perspective, but I think it's important for white people to have this opportunity to talk to each other in a way that we can ask questions that may seem really stupid, or to challenge some, to be like, wow, I never thought of that, or to feel safer. And sometimes it is feel safer with people to ask questions when you don't necessarily, when you're worried about what you're going to say. And it's also unfair, I think, sometimes to ask people who are not white to take care of us when we suddenly recognize how awful the world is, and that's really painful to us. But it's been so painful to those folks for such a long time. To ask them to take care of us is also kind of a step too far, I think. So I think when we hear Black people talking about the pain, or other people who have experienced discrimination, sometimes it's hard and overwhelming for us when we get that, to take care of them in the way, and we feel guilty, like, or we're in denial. It can't be that bad, because what does that mean about me? So I think it's unfair to ask someone to take care of us as they're describing their own pain, and they need support around what's been happening to them. And for us to, ask them to support us as we're sort of having the reality change for us, it's unfair. And so I think white people helping other white people to understand, and to help us throughout that process of realization, so that we can meet people who've been suffering with discrimination and not receiving all the privileges, to meet them where they're at, and to meet them as equal partners, in challenging society and trying to make it better.
Yeah, I really think too, I agree with you as far as the discussion. I think the discussion needs to happen too, from white person to white person, because I think that there's a lot to sort of work through, and to talk about. Any opportunities to gain perspectives is going to be helpful in your understanding. So I think, again, I'll go back to, I know one of our questions is, what is our role in helping fix the problem? And I think that sharing and listening to other people's perspectives is really, really important. White people, as well as Black people, as well as anyone, but I just think especially, to just have a better understanding of what's going on, and how what role you plan on taking. I mean, you could obviously take a political role, and in trying to shape sort of policy. And I mean, I know right now, a big thing right now that's happening is talking about voter rights, and that some people in government are trying to limit who gets to vote and who doesn't get to vote. And so I think, I mean, that's sort of an example of the political way, but even in your community, what kind of things can you do in your community to help with, be a solution to what's going on, instead of perpetuating the problem. So, maybe it's getting involved in protesting. I know that's something that I've done a few times, and so it definitely is a way to share your concerns. So yeah, but the bottom line is definitely talking about it, and trying to understand where other people are coming from.
Well, I wanna go back to one of our earlier videos, about working through conflict, and I think that talking about racism is a very taboo topic in our culture, and our culture tends to want to not talk about things, and to avoid conflict. And I think, especially for white people, it can be hard to recognize some of the things that maybe we've been active participants in without really thinking about it, and that defensiveness can come up. And I think we have to be gentle with ourselves and others as we start to wake up and realize that our society isn't always exactly what we thought it was, and that there are people that are left out, and that it's kind of ugly. And yes, when we start to speak out about it, we sort of set ourselves up as targets. But when we think about it, racism really is a white problem. It's perpetuated by, and not always are we responsible necessarily as individuals in that, we are racist to other people, or I'd like to think that many of us haven't gone out and said mean things or cruel things. Sometimes we say things that, without understanding, can be hurtful. And I think being open and to hearing that, and to recognizing that, hey, I'm a good person, I'm trying my best. And I'm new, I'm learning something that's really difficult and hard. And so and to also recognize that sometimes people aren't going to always come at this in the nicest way. Some people are very angry, and when they talk to us or tell us things, they might be really angry. And and we find ways to care for ourselves and to be supportive at the same time. And we have our own journey of dealing with guilt, or recognizing that hey, I've been living a very privileged life, even though at times it doesn't mean that there are areas that all of us may have felt like at times, because of who we are, we've been hurt or damaged for an identity that we have. And however, there's lots of areas of privilege that we haven't recognized. And so how do we own that, our role in society, maybe not even intentionally, but how do we recognize that and move forward with wow, maybe things aren't the way I thought they were, and how do I work to change them to be the way that I want them to be for everybody?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, if I might, Bucky, I think I just thought of, and I think a term I really like is leaning into the discomfort. And how do we embrace and stay with that discomfort that we have, having difficult conversations, using good skills to do that, and owning our own perspectives, and being open to other perspectives, but just being able to recognize, and it takes a lot of strength. You're a strong person when you can listen to someone else if they're mad at you and try to just understand their perspective without defending yourself,
Yep.
and believing them. Like a lot of times the reactions that people have is disbelief. I've heard like people say, people just, opportunities there for everyone if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and there aren't roadblocks in your way. We all have the same opportunity. And it's really difficult for people to when they recognize that that's not true, and that there are lots of roadblocks in the way for people who aren't white. And they've suffered that way a long time. And our society isn't fair to everyone. And we've benefited from some of that. So being able to really accept that, and to not necessarily say I'm a bad person because of that, but it might make me make some decisions about my behavior, change some of the beliefs I have, and come at this world with a different perspective and different behaviors.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, I've sort of been on the soapbox about understanding, but I think you're right, Paul. It's hard. It's hard work. It's you're patient, you're listening, you're asking questions, you're trying to deal with those feelings that are coming up within yourself during your conversation, and keeping those in check so that you can try to understand what the other person is trying to say. So, I mean, it is difficult work, but I also think too, the more it is a way of being, and the more you practice those skills. I think that's why we're doing this series. I mean, we're trying to get people to take these skills and use them to help you navigate through this difficult world that we live in. So if you need to go back, review, please do so. So
yes. And I one more point I thought around generalizing is that generalizing, sometimes we can generalize experience, but it may or may not be true. Like I said, we're all different. I know for me, I've had to challenge my own thoughts and seeing some of the seeing not every person that charged the Capitol was a white person. Not every person who was involved in that movement was a white person. And so that generalization of like, well, and I know I've been guilty of thinking, well, you know, how could they be a non-white person and still think and participate in that way? And it's just a reminder to me that one, I don't know what's going on in their head.
Right.
And that, I'm making, again, sweeping generalizations. And so until I know what's in a person's mind and have a better understanding of their experience and perspective, I really don't know what's happening. I can just speak out from my perspective and own my perspective that, I don't think that, I don't think that racism should play a role in our society and it should go away. And that, there's a lot of work to be done. And some people don't see that. And so all I can do is speak from my experience and my perspective and try not to generalize or assume what someone should think or what their experience is based on anything. Right. Asking questions.
Well, and I also think too that, generalizing is simple to do. It's something very easy to do. And, I think it's like, you read something like you were talking about, like the riot at the Capitol, and you're, automatically, assuming that, okay, so all these people were white males, and so yeah, I think, those are things that you need to just be aware of, when you start going down that road of generalizing. It's not, it can be very unhealthy, and it can also, like, your shape your own viewpoint to the point where you're again getting to that sort of tunnel vision, and not looking at other perspectives. So yeah.
When I think about how do we help people maybe recognize that their beliefs aren't necessarily helpful for a kind of society we want, I assume we all want to live in. I mean, I think, treat your neighbor as you would treat your own family, or we're all brothers and sisters in this, crazy experiment of life. And we all need each other. I mean, we can't get through this life without each other. We're social creatures. And so I think there are some people that may never change their beliefs or their attitudes, but I think the way we approach them sometimes, and it may take multiple approaches. I think sometimes it's important for people to stand up and be angry and say, this isn't okay, and I'm not going to accept anything other than change. And I think there are voices sometimes that are like, I really want to understand where you're coming from, and I want to help you try to understand my perspective as well. And so I think reaching out to people and there are people who have been very racist, and in fact overtly racist, and they think that they're right. And I think we talked last week that being right or wrong isn't always the if we go for that, no one's going to win. So how do we have really deep conversations with people who may think differently than us and try to help them understand our perspective and what we care about and what our basic values are? And people have fears, and fear gets in the way a lot. They're afraid of, I've heard a lot of white people talk about they're afraid of reverse racism and reverse discrimination. I've heard a lot of men say they're afraid that, they're going to lose their, how can you be a man in this society? You can't say anything and you can't. And so I think the fear and maybe a lack of understanding of what is real out there. And I think it's really just important to have those conversations in ways that, we can try to reach people.
Yep. Well, this has been a good discussion. Like we said before, we didn't, usually we, sort of plan out like what we're going to do. And this was definitely sort of some guiding questions. And I hope that it's been a valuable experience for you to listen to this. Again, we always welcome your comments. Please leave comments in the comments section. Yeah, we'll be back.
Yes, and thank you, Becky. And our aim for talking about this is really to hopefully get people having conversations that are important. We look forward to comments and questions. And, we own our own perspective that, we're all doing the best that we can. And we really think it's important for us to talk about this topic and to reach out. And we know, and in my heart, I know that especially I really care about youth. I care about everyone, but I really care about youth. And I've done a lot of work with youth, and I've seen how racism in Vermont, in mostly white places, how people who aren't white, what their experiences are. And it's horrifying sometimes. And I know my neighbors and my community, for the most part, we all feel like we're good people and that, we understand and we reach out. And then to hear some of the experiences of non-white people in our communities, really, it's horrifying to me. And I really want to understand how what I would think of as good people can do such terrible things to someone else. And I want to be part of the solution to stop that, because it hurts me to know that that's happening. And I recognize how that affects some of the people that I really care about that just happen to not have white skin.
Well said.
Thanks. And please put your comments below and your questions. And hopefully you're out there having great conversations and asking questions. And if this video does that, then we're excited.